I was sitting at the kitchen table Friday evening, eating leftover pot roast and half watching the evening news, when my daughter-in-law Renee's phone lit up on the counter beside the fruit bowl. She was in the shower. I could hear the water running upstairs, and my son Marcus was still on his way home from a late shift at the plant. I wasn't snooping. The phone was just there, face up, and the screen lit bright enough that I couldn't miss it. The notification preview read, "Thinking about you all day. How's our baby boy doing tonight?" I set down my fork. The sender's name was Warren Holt. Now, I'm 63 years old. I've been around long enough to know that a message like that, from a man to another man's wife, doesn't come out of nowhere. You don't text a married woman "our baby boy" unless there's a story behind it. Unless there's history. Unless that baby boy means something to both of you that he has no business meaning. Marcus and Renee's son, little Owen, was 4 months old. He was asleep upstairs in his crib at that very moment. I'd been over to help with dinner because Renee said she was exhausted, and Marcus had been pulling double shifts to cover the new hospital bills. That was the life they were living. Diapers, formula, no sleep, tight money. And I had been proud of my son for grinding through it. Proud of him for not complaining. I sat there and looked at that phone for a long moment. Then I picked up my own phone and took a picture of her screen. I didn't unlock it, didn't touch it, just photographed the notification exactly as it appeared. Timestamp, sender name, message preview, and set her phone back down in the same spot facing the same direction. I went back to my pot roast, but I didn't taste another bite of it. I need to back up and explain something about Warren Holt, because none of this makes sense without that context. Warren Holt was Renee's supervisor at Meridian Financial, where she'd worked for about 3 years before Owen was born. She'd gone on maternity leave in December and was supposed to return in the spring. Warren was, by all accounts I'd ever heard, a decent enough man professionally. Mid-40s, married, 2 kids of his own out in Belmont. Renee had mentioned him casually over the years the way you mention any coworker. Complaints about his management style, a few comments about office politics, nothing that ever made my ears perk up. But I'm a retired police detective. 31 years with the Henrico County Sheriff's Office before my knees gave out, and my doctor told me to start thinking about blood pressure. And I'll tell you something I learned in 3 decades of detective work. It's not the dramatic moments that reveal the truth. It's the small ones. The things people say when they're not thinking about what they're saying. The details that don't add up until they suddenly do. There had been small things. Renee checking her phone during family dinners in a way that felt private. Angled slightly away, screen dimmed down. I'd noticed it and filed it away as nothing. She was on maternity leave, probably bored, probably texting her friends. Marcus mentioning once offhand that Renee had started showering at night instead of in the mornings, which she'd apparently explained being easier with the baby's schedule. That struck me as odd at the time, but I let it go. A Sunday afternoon back in February when I'd stopped by unannounced, and Renee had come to the door looking startled. Not just surprised, but startled. And there had been a pause before she let me in that I'd told myself meant nothing. I was good at telling myself things meant nothing. It's what you do when you love your family and you want to believe the best. But now I was sitting at my son's kitchen table with the photograph on my phone of a text message that said, "Our baby boy," and I wasn't going to tell myself that meant nothing. Renee came downstairs 20 minutes later in a robe, hair wrapped in a towel, and she picked up her phone immediately. I watched her face in my peripheral vision while I pretended to be absorbed in the news. There was a flicker, fast, practiced, and then she typed something and set the phone down again. "Thanks for staying for dinner, Walt," she said. That's what she called me, Walt. Never Dad, which I'd always figured was a boundary thing and never pushed. Anytime I said, "Owen, sleep okay," like a rock, finally. She smiled, and she was good at smiling, I'll give her that. Marcus came through the door about 40 minutes later, still in his work clothes, smelling like machine oil and exhaustion. He kissed Renee on the cheek, ruffled my shoulder going past, and went straight to the refrigerator. I stayed another half hour, helped clear the dishes, hugged my son goodnight, drove home with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel and my mind running like a caseboard. Here's the thing about being a retired detective and a father. Those 2 parts of you are always at war. The detective wants evidence, wants to be certain before he does anything, wants to build a complete picture before he moves. The father wants to pick up the phone and call his son right now and tell him everything. I went home and I sat in my armchair and I stared at the photo on my phone for a long time. Thinking about you all day. How's our baby boy doing tonight? Our baby boy. I thought about Owen. 4 months old, just starting to grab at things, making those little sounds that aren't quite words yet. Marcus sent me videos almost every evening. Owen discovering his own feet. Owen laughing at the dog 2 doors down. My son was crazy about that child. Completely, helplessly in love with him the way good fathers get. I needed to know the truth before I said a single word to Marcus. Because if I was wrong, if there was some innocent explanation I wasn't seeing, I would have blown up my son's family over a misread text message. And if I was right, I needed to be sure enough that Marcus couldn't talk himself out of it. So I did what I know how to do. I started working. I still have contacts. You don't spend 31 years in law enforcement without accumulating people who owe you favors, or who just trust you enough to have a quiet conversation. I'm not going to detail every step I took because some of it wouldn't look good in the retelling. But I will tell you that within 72 hours I had confirmed 3 things. First, Warren Holt had sent Renee somewhere between 40 and 60 text messages in the 6 weeks since Owen was born. I didn't have the content of all of them. I'm retired, not omniscient, but the frequency and timing told me enough. Late evenings, weekend afternoons. Never during normal business hours, which meant he wasn't texting about work. Second, Warren Holt's personal calendar, which his own wife, a woman named Patricia, apparently had shared access to through their family Google account, showed several entries in the months before Owen's birth that listed lunch at a restaurant called Tassels on West Broad Street. Tassels is not cheap. It's not the kind of place you go for a working lunch with a subordinate. Third, and this one cost me a night of bad sleep. Renee's due date, worked backwards from Owen's birth in December, put conception somewhere in late March or early April of last year. I pulled out my phone and I went back through every photo Marcus had sent me over the past 2 years. Because my son sends me photos constantly, it's how he communicates. And I found a series of pictures from late March of last year that showed my son at his buddy Kevin's bachelor weekend in Myrtle Beach. 4 days. He'd been gone 4 days during that window. I sat with that for a very long time. I'm not a man who cries easily. I've worked homicide scenes, delivered death notifications to families, sat across from people who'd done terrible things and had to stay composed. But I sat in my armchair that night and I was not composed. I was 63 years old and I was thinking about my son making videos of a baby discovering his own feet, and I felt something break open in my chest that I don't have a better word for than grief. I called my old partner, Denny Vasquez, the next morning. Denny retired 2 years before I did and now runs a small private investigations firm over in Chesterfield. I told him what I had. He listened without interrupting, which is why he was always the best interview partner I ever worked with. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You want me to get you a paternity test referral," he said. "I need someone who can do it without Marcus knowing yet," I said. "I need a sample from the baby, Walt." He paused. "You're sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm sure I need to know the truth," I said. "Whatever road that is." Denny knew a pediatric lab in the West End that handled private paternity testing. No court order required, fully confidential, results in 5 to 7 business days. The challenge was getting a usable sample from Owen. I couldn't swab the baby myself without Renee knowing, and I obviously wasn't going to tell Marcus what I was doing. It turned out I didn't have to be clever about it. 2 days later, Marcus called me and asked if I could come watch Owen for a few hours on Saturday morning, while he took Renee to a doctor's appointment. Something routine, he said. She'd been having some postpartum checkups. I said of course. I spent 4 hours with Owen that Saturday. Fed him his bottle, changed him twice, held him while he fell asleep against my shoulder, and I collected what I needed. A few strands of hair from his soft little head, handled with gloves I'd brought in my jacket pocket, sealed into the collection envelope the lab had provided. I drove to the lab on my way home. Then I went home and I waited. 5 days is a long time when you're waiting for something like that. I went through the motions, watched the Braves, mowed my yard, had coffee with my neighbor Frank on Tuesday morning. I didn't tell a soul what I was doing. Not Denny. Not my daughter Sharon up in Roanoke. Nobody. I thought a lot about Marcus during those 5 days. He was 34 years old. He'd had a hard early adulthood, some trouble in his early 20s that I won't get into, years where we weren't as close as I would have wanted. But he'd straightened out, found his footing, met Renee, settled into his life. He was a good man, he worked hard, he loved his wife and he loved his son with everything he had. And I thought, if the test comes back and Owen is his, I have to decide what to do with everything else I know. The texts, the calendar entries, the questions I can't answer. I'd have to figure out whether what I suspected was actually happening now, or whether it was something that had ended before the baby was born. Whether my son's marriage was salvageable, or whether it was already gone, and he just didn't know it. And if the test comes back the other way, I couldn't finish that thought without having to put it down and walk away from it. The results came on a Thursday. Email to the secure account I'd set up for exactly this purpose, account that Marcus didn't know existed. I opened it at my kitchen table, same table where I eat every morning alone since my wife Barbara passed 4 years ago. I read it twice. The probability of paternity, whole %. Warren Holt was Owen's biological father. I called Denny. I got the results, I said. He knew what that meant from my voice. I'm sorry, Walt, I need a favor, I said. I need Patricia Holt's contact information. There was a pause. Her home address? Email? Whatever you can find. Walt, are you sure about how you want to handle this? I've thought about it for 5 days, I said. I'm sure. I want to explain my thinking, because people are going to have opinions about what I did next, and I'd rather they understand it than just react to it. I could have gone to Marcus first, told him everything, shown him the evidence, let him decide how to respond. That was the obvious move and in some ways the right one. But here's what stopped me. Marcus has a temper. Not a violent one, but a reactive one. He's the kind of man who acts before he thinks when he's hurt, and he was going to be devastated in a way I couldn't fully predict. If I handed him this information cold, I didn't know what he'd do. Confront Renee in a way that let her deny and destroy evidence. Call Warren Holt directly. Go off the rails in some way that ended up hurting his legal position if it came to divorce proceedings. I wanted Warren Holt's wife to know what her husband had done before Renee had a chance to manage the narrative. I wanted there to be an unavoidable consequence already in motion, before Renee could spin this into something Marcus might be persuaded to forgive and quietly move past. I know that sounds calculated. It was calculated. I spent 31 years thinking about how information moves and how people respond to it, and I used those skills. I'm not going to apologize for that. I found a current email address for Patricia Holt through Denny. I composed the email myself sitting at my kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon, and I took 2 hours to write it because I wanted it to be exactly right. I told her who I was. I told her my connection to Renee. I told her about the text message I'd seen sent, a photograph of it. I told her about the lab results. Attached a copy of the paternity report, with all identifying information for the child redacted, because Owen didn't deserve to have his name in this any more than necessary. I told her about the calendar entries at Tassels that showed lunches during the period when Owen would have been conceived. I did not editorialize. I did not call her husband names. I just laid out what I had, the way I used to lay out evidence in a case file, and I told her that I was telling her because she deserved to know, and because her husband's actions had consequences that went beyond what he was apparently willing to face on his own. I signed it with my full name and my phone number. I hit send at 4:47 in the afternoon. At 6:23 that evening, an hour and 36 minutes later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. "Is this Walter Odom?" A woman's voice said. Calm but tight, the way voices get when someone is holding themselves together by main force. "It is," I said. "This is Patricia Holt." I won't share everything Patricia said to me in that call. Some of it was private. Her pain, her shock, her own suspicions she'd been pushing down for months. I'll just say that she was a smart woman who had apparently been uneasy about her husband for a while, and had been looking for a reason to trust her gut, and I had just given her that reason in documented form. She asked me one question I wasn't expecting. "Does your son know yet?" "No," I said. "I wanted you to know first." There was a silence. Then she said very quietly, "Thank you." We talked for about 20 minutes. Before we hung up, she told me she would be calling her attorney the following morning. She did not ask me to stay out of it. She did not ask me to give her husband a chance to explain. She just said thank you, and she said she was sorry about my son, and she hung up. I sat for a few minutes, then I called Marcus. "Hey Dad," he said. He sounded tired. I could hear Owen fussing in the background and Renee murmuring something. "Can you talk?" I said. "What's up?" Something in my voice registered with him, because the background noise settled slightly, like he'd moved to another room. "I need to come over," I said. "Tonight. There's something I need to show you." I won't describe that evening in detail because it doesn't belong to me to describe. The way a person receives devastating news is theirs. The sounds they make, the way they hold their body, that's private. I'll tell you what I brought. My phone with the photograph of the text message, the printed paternity test results, and the documentation I'd compiled from my research. I laid it all out on the same kitchen table where I'd been eating pot roast the evening this started. I talked him through it in order, the way I'd talk a junior detective through a case. Here is what I observed, here is what I investigated, here is what I found. Marcus went through the materials twice. He didn't say much. When he got to the paternity results, he set the papers down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall for a long time. Renee was upstairs. She didn't know I was there. Marcus had told her I was stopping by to drop something off, which was true enough. After a while, Marcus said, "You sent this to her, to Warren's wife, before you told me?" "Yes," I said. "I want to explain why." And I did. I told him everything I told you. About his temper. About wanting there to be consequences already in motion. About protecting his legal position. He listened. He didn't agree right away. He was angry at me briefly, and he had the right to be. But eventually he nodded. Not agreeing exactly, just acknowledging. "What do I do now?" he said. "Tonight nothing," I said. Tonight you don't talk to Renee. Tonight you call an attorney. I've got a name for you, family law, she's good. You call her first thing tomorrow morning before you say a word to Renee about any of this. He looked at me. You had a name ready. I've had one ready since Thursday, I said. Something moved across his face. I don't know if it was anger or gratitude or just the shock of realizing how much I had been carrying alone. Maybe all three. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, Dad, that was 8 months ago. The divorce was finalized last month. It was not a gentle process. Renee, once she understood what had been documented, initially tried to claim the paternity test was flawed and demanded a court-ordered retest. That test confirmed the first. She then tried several other avenues that her attorney apparently advised her were worth attempting, none of which went anywhere. Warren Holt and Patricia Holt separated the same week I sent that email. I don't know the current status of their divorce because that's not my business, but Denny mentioned in passing that he'd heard Warren had left Meridian Financial sometime in the spring under circumstances nobody was being specific about. Owen, and I want to be careful about how I say this because it's a complicated situation that Marcus and his attorney handled thoughtfully. Owen's legal status is still being sorted through the court system. It's not simple. My son loves that child. He told me once, about 3 months into all of this, that the hardest part wasn't Renee and wasn't the betrayal and wasn't even the lie. The hardest part was Owen. He doesn't know any of this, Marcus said. He's just a baby. None of this is on him. I told him I knew. And I told him that whatever he decided about his relationship with Owen going forward, I would support him. Because that's true. What I know is this, my son is not the man who was destroyed by this. He's the man who survived it. He moved into an apartment in Short Pump in January, and slowly, the way these things go slowly, he started coming back to himself. He got a promotion at the plant in March. He started going to the gym again, then started running. He called me more than he ever has in his adult life, which sounds like a small thing but wasn't. Last Sunday he came over for dinner and we sat on my back porch after and watched the sun go down over the tree line, and he said, I keep thinking I should be angrier. Are you? I said. He thought about it. Less than I expected, he said. Is that weird? No, I said. It means you're healing. He nodded and looked out at the yard. After a minute he said, I'm glad you didn't tell me first, Dad. I'm glad you did it the way you did. I didn't say anything for a bit. Then I said, I wasn't sure you'd ever say that. He glanced over at me. Did you think I wouldn't forgive you? I thought it might take longer, I said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was close to one. You did what any good detective would do, he said. You just worked the case. And I said, You're not a case, Marcus. You're my son. He nodded, and we sat there until the light was all gone, and the fireflies started up in the grass, and neither of us felt the need to say anything else. I'm 63 years old. I've buried a wife. I've delivered news to families that ended their worlds. I've seen what betrayal does to good people. And I've seen what survival looks like on the other side of it. What I know sitting here now is that the truth is always better than the alternative, even when it breaks things, especially then, because you can only rebuild what you can see clearly, and the things you can't see clearly will keep breaking you long after they should have stopped. Marcus is going to be okay. I'm sure of it the same way I've always been sure of things that matter. Slowly, quietly, without fanfare, based on evidence accumulated over time. A father knows.